Hey guys, Glendrose here. So we have a special, uh, you know, video today because um, somebody had mentioned in the comments and asked if I was doing requests, and I was like, well, sure, why not? Because it's sometimes it's difficult to figure out what song you want to want to do on a given day. And actually, like I mentioned to him or her, I'm not. I think it's generally easier to do a reaction than it is to do a breakdown, especially some of the songs I've been doing lately. The other one that I've got on my plate for tonight is I was going to do it first, but it's a tough one. For several reasons. It's a tough one because the material is challenging from a musical standpoint, but more than that, it's a incredibly emotionally devastating song in a lot of ways. So it's yeah, that's going to be an interesting one, but that'll be later tonight. So for right now, we're going to do a reaction to a song. This was requested by um, oh yeah, Silver Kyrie, and I'm not sure pronunciation wise on that. I've always pronounced it Kyrie because actually, as if for people who've been watching the channel may know, I run a D&D game, right? And I started out many years ago playing D&D from the Dragonlance books, and one of the races in Dragonlance is a Kiri or Kyrie or however you want to pronounce it. So I've always pronounced it Kyrie. That's the way that it was said in the like the audiobooks and stuff like that. So it's kind of what I always went with. Um, but I believe in the non fantasy context, it's actually pronounced differently. So feel free to mention in the comments how it's actually pronounced because I don't know. But anyways, so he or she requested Virgin Black, and the song is called "Our Wings Are Burning." Now, I've heard Virgin Black before. It's been, I think, almost a decade. Um, I was trying to remember where I heard them, and I remember that I was at the time. It was when I was in D.C. and I was working at the Kennedy Center. So I remember that's when I heard them because I was talking about heavy metal because I used to bring my guitar to work and sit out on the terrace and sort of play during my lunch hour. And I was talking with somebody who was there, and she mentioned this band as a band that had a heavy classical influence. And seeing that we were working at a performing arts center, so I remember listening to them, but at the time I was not really into that style of metal. Really, I mean, I liked it. I didn't have any issues with it, but I didn't really. I wasn't familiar with doom metal, and I didn't really know goth metal beyond, some of some of the more well known acts and stuff like that. And I had just started listening to Therian, and I mentioned Therian to her, and she had never heard of Therian. I had never heard of Virgin Black, so we both were kind of checking out new stuff. But it's interesting because liked I liked a lot of their sound, and they're I think relatively interesting and unique in that doom metal space. Side note, interesting thing. they're on the same record label as Green Carnation, which is kind of cool. So, and I think that's actually how I heard them because um, I used to order a lot of stuff from the End Records, and because before the End was a record label, they were just a store. They were a really great place to get underground metal CDs, DVDs, and stuff like that because a lot of stores weren't carrying that stuff and still aren't carrying that stuff. I mean, it's interesting because I went the other like I think this was maybe like 3 weeks ago. I went to uh, I think it was like FYE, like one of the standard chain music stores. And they have a vinyl section, right? Which is crazy, right? Because it's I know vinyl was making a comeback, but I thought it was really funny that you walk to the back of the store and there's this huge vinyl section. So I'm going through the vinyl and I was looking for like classic metal stuff. I picked up a vinyl of Rust in Peace, which was one I never had on vinyl, and I'm going through and I found a vinyl for Skeleton Witch, an EP of all things from Skeleton Witch. I was like, this is the most random shit I've ever seen. This is crazy. So I picked that up, and it was. I'll be honest, it wasn't really my favorite because it was actually sort of the change from Skeleton Witch going from. They had just gotten rid of their vocalist, Chance, I think was his name, and the new vocalist is different and the direction the band took, I don't think it had anything to do with the vocalist per se, but they went in a much more black metal direction as opposed to their thrash roots. So I was disappointed in that, although having listened to the new album that they just put out, I've kind of turned around a little bit on that because I really liked some of the newer songs on the album. I just don't think that they're very I was going to say very skilled, but that's not the right word. I don't think they're like the most proficient at playing black metal as compared to, say, thrash. Because the songs that still tend to be the best ones on that record were the ones that were a little thrashier than the others, right? And nothing on that album really reminded me much of their early stuff that was like just basically straight up thrash with some black metal elements. But there were songs that had a lot of thrash stuff to it, kind of more in the vein of like, say, Old Man's Child, was what some of their better songs on the new album reminded me of. But like, I mean, you can listen for yourselves. The one I would recommend checking out that struck me as very different was a song called Fen of Shadows, and when I listened to it, I was like, I can definitely see that this is definitely a conscious attempt by the band to do black metal. But I didn't feel that it was 100%. It didn't feel 100% authentic. Which I really hate saying that because they're a really great band and it's played perfectly. It's not that there's anything, but I don't know. There was just something missing and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. But anyways, I used to get these records from, or not records, these compilations from the End, and they would be like a bunch of different artists that were on their record label or whatever. And I remember hearing some songs from Virgin Black, and that way. And occasionally you'll find a band you really love from those compilations, and I don't know if they really do those anymore. They used to send them as a promo if you bought something from the record label. Like if I bought a bunch of CDs from the End, like say I bought a bunch of Green Carnation CDs or something, right? They would send you one of these compilations in like a little cardboard, sleeve thing, right? Didn't have to spend a ton of money, but it was sort of promoting their artists, their other artists that were maybe smaller artists or weren't as well known. And I kind of wonder if labels do that anymore because I haven't seen it done in a long time. And so yeah, I just kind of curious if anyone's actually seen that still happening. But anyways, so Virgin Black is an interesting one in that regard. I believe they use a violin, maybe a cello. Let me bring up their Let me bring up their little page real quick and see, because I don't really know a ton about the band, and I really don't like. I'm different, I think, than most reaction channels because I don't like going into something completely cold. I like to have a little bit of knowledge about what I'm going to be listening to, you know. And okay, so they're interesting. They're Australian. So this explains why, because Silver Kyrie recommended this one because I think it's a favorite band of Zen from Ne Vlobiscaris. And that actually makes total sense because they're from Australia. So let's see. It says here vocals, piano, keyboards, lead guitar, rhythm guitar, bass, and drums. So no, nothing about the core. It says the core, the lineups, augmented choirs and string sections in the studio. So they had session musicians, you know, that were doing some of this stuff, which is interesting. Um, They're classified, according to this, as goth, heavy death, and doom metal, which, you know, makes it's a sort of a catch-all type of thing. When I listened to them, they very much struck me as a mix of goth and doom metal. Whereas, like for example, Therian is much more of a focus on, say, symphonic metal and with some goth elements thrown in there. So. Interesting to see how this comes together. This is apparently their most popular song, so interested to see how this comes out. So we'll give this one a listen and see what we see. Okay. It's an interesting song. Okay, so I have a couple of notes on this one. Nothing crazy. I thought that the piano intro was really nice. And kind of actually what they also went out on as well. And just kind of fit the general, and sort of, not necessarily fit, but I think sort of set the tone for the general melancholy of the song. Um, and the vocals were interesting. I don't know that I would say that I really liked them overall. Um, it's funny because they reminded me a little bit of Typo Negative, except if you took Peter Steele's vocals and pitched them up several octaves, because it's like it was like a because Peter has a very deep voice, so like it's kind of like they took the way that the phrases were delivered and stuff like that reminded me a lot of that. And it could also be a sort of a mental trick too, because of the music being somewhat similar in some ways to some of the Typo songs. um, there's some really some really interesting stuff though that he does vocally, aside from his normal singing voice. The spoken word stuff that's used at a couple points in the song I really liked. um, I almost always like that when it's used in a song, unless it's like overused. Um, and it very rarely does that happen in metal. That the one of the great examples to me is a song that I really want to do next week by Orphan Land, called "The Storm Still Rages Inside," which has a lot of features a lot of spoken word. And I think it can really be used effectively, especially if you're trying to tell a story, which we'll get into the lyrics for the song in a second here, because I have the lyric videos. Um, so at that point, you have the drums that came in, and sort of this, and this part I really like too. It was a non-distorted electric guitar, and it kind of added a little bit more heft. It was the same rhythm pattern and everything, but it was just adding a little more weight to it because it was an electric guitar, but just didn't have distortion. Um, and then there's these really nice falsetto parts that I liked a lot too. It's funny because I liked everything he did with his voice except for his normal singing voice, which is really strange, I guess. His falsettos were, like I said, were fantastic, and they were used sort of as atmosphere after that section. It's almost like they sampled it, and then used it. I don't think it was sampled, but I'm saying that it felt kind of like it was there and then pushed into the background. Which there's a couple points where you could definitely tell the vocals were tracked multiple times. In some senses, there's one case where I think it was actually triple tracked. Um, we'll get to that when we get to that particular part. And then the distortion came in around 320. So then you have a very typical, doom metal sort of, kind of plodding riff. Very heavy, slightly buzzy distortion sound. Then and this is kind of one of the things this song does that's unique is the distortion comes in, but it doesn't really stay. It's only around for about a minute and change, and then it drops out again at about the 4 minute and 15 minute mark, and there's more whispered vocals, and then there's sort of a kind of a momentary, pause where you just have a little bit of like strings, and in the piano, and then the vocals and the music all come back in kind of at once, and there's more. This was sort of, I think, the climax of the song, because there's more of a you've kind of have everything going at once here, including his vocals here are taking almost more of a I don't want to say power metal approach, but definitely he's sitting higher up in his range, and and this part is where there was some multiple vocal tracking. There was certainly screamed vocals tracked on top of his regular vocals for certain. And I think maybe also falsetto tracked way in the back as well. That kind of falsetto was continuing all throughout the song after it first made its appearance. So I felt like in this particular part of the song, there was actually 3 vocal layers, which was really cool. I love when bands do vocal layering. One of the bands that I always think of when I think of vocal layering is Blind Guardian. There's tons of other bands that obviously do that, but they were one of the first bands. I remember when I first listened to Nightfall and Middle Earth, and I was like, this is crazy because it sounds like he's got 5 singers. But it's all just Hansi. It's just like he tracked multiple different vocal lines and sort of blended the harmonies together. He was a master at it, and I think there's a lot of bands that do that now. You see it a lot more often, but at the time, I think that was fairly rare. So, but anyways, this although this song actually came out around that time. This was. Let me see what the date was on this one here. So this is listed. This video was posted on 2009, but I think the song actually came out 3 years before this. So this was not that far removed from around the time that Nightfall and Middle Earth came out. So you were starting to see bands use that. I think that sort of approach more, and now I think it's become almost commonplace to have layered vocals like that. So let's see now. There's the string section kind of comes in more dominant, I would say, and continues really towards the end of the song. This is like at about 5.5 minutes or so, and then the guitar solo comes in at 6:40, and it really caught me off guard. You'll probably see it when you watch the video. I was at first not certain whether or not it was a guitar or an electric violin because the tonality was so unusual for a guitar. It was very, very, very bright, which is something an electrified violin tends to sound very bright and very clean. So that was what was unique about it. I mean, this was a distorted electric guitar. But it was very, very high, very bright, and very clean, which is not something you typically hear. And I would say it definitely, like after the solo went on for a few minutes, it was definitely a guitar. I'm pretty sure. I don't think it was a violin, but it definitely at first made me think about that. And the solo itself, while nothing super flashy, really fit the overall tonality of the song. It was a very melancholic sort of solo, and it fit perfectly with the song. And I would say maybe that probably went for about a minute, maybe a little bit less, and then the outro of the song was just more of the string section part giving way to a mirror of the piano intro to lead out. It's an interesting song. I would say to me, though, this reminded me a lot less of Therian than I was expecting. I was expecting maybe more Therian, and this actually reminded me a little bit more of Typo or Him, which that's not meant as any sort of a knock, but I think it's also indicative of the fact that I was never really into goth, metal or really even into doom metal that much. So it's a genre for me that's a little bit harder for me to talk about because I don't know I don't have a point of reference for a lot of the stuff. So I think in the end I would give this one probably a 8.2 out of 10 or so. But before I give a final rating, let's take a quick look at the lyrics here. So lyrics are, we fell in love with dust in our lids and pain of a severed soul. We lowered our heads and lifted our face, placed our bodies in celebration, poured the ointment of grief on the lips of a mutilated man. I carry the bones of a deformed child. Interesting. We fell in love with dust in our lids. The dust in our lids line I'm not certain about. The pain of a severed soul. Lifted our face, placed our bodies in celebration. I think with the way that this is going, I mean, I could be totally off base here, but this sounds almost like a miscarriage type of situation. Two people, fell in love. They maybe damaged, people. They're expecting a child, so there's, celebration. And then ointment of grief. And then I carry the bones of a deformed child, which, deformed could be like, like a, like a small child, looks kind of like an old man, and with my polluted breath, I speak the old man's words and a persuasive eloquence. That's an interesting line. Bless the dust that hides the unlamenting head. Interesting. With my polluted breath, I speak the old man's words. And my polluted breath, I speak the old man's words. Interesting. Bless the dust that hides the unlamenting head. I don't know what this particular stanza is really talking about. Yeah. On the crest of fire our wings are burning, how glorious the pain, and the ways of God shriek out of tune. How glorious the pain and the ways of God shriek out of tune, all was lost but hope. All is lost but hope. Well, I mean, this is an interesting one because my question to Kyrie would be is, are they a Christian metal band? Because this, I don't know, a part of this makes me wonder because of the way that this is not typical of goth and doom metal. I would say, some of the things are the first three stanzas was pretty much like typical goth metal, doom metal lyrics, but these last two lines are really interesting because they're talking about hope, which is not something. All is lost but hope. And when we talk about like the hope for a better future, like, because everyone talks about the current situations that we're in, about how divided everybody is wherever you sit on the side of the political spectrum. There's people on both sides that are just constantly attacking each other. So when you look at it from an outsider's perspective, it really seems like we're just we're spiraling down, into a place that is really difficult for us to climb out of, and all we can really do is hope that eventually people will be able to learn how to freaking communicate with each other. Um, the one thing that's interesting to me is how glorious the pain in the ways of God. Because, well, from with the Christian standpoint, and I've really learned a lot from watching, because I'm not a Christian. I went to Catholic schools, but that's about the extent of my knowledge in sort of the Christian ways. But I've learned a ton from watching, Vin and Sori, right? And they talk about about almost celebrating the pain of being a servant or disciple or whatever of God. But then this next part says, "Shriek out of tune," which makes you think, is this actually not Christian at all? It's saying that that all this stuff is just we're just fooling ourselves, in a way that's almost somewhat of an atheistic statement, and then all is lost but hope, which, on one hand sounds really great, because, it's saying, oh, hope is the savior, but if you don't believe in anything, is there really hope? So is this actually a nihilistic statement? It's very interesting indeed. And in the last stanzas, "On the crest of fire our wings are burning." I love the imagery. "To the wind's anthem, all is lost but hope." To the wind's anthem. It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, lyrically speaking, I don't know. This is it's not my forte to be breaking down lyrics, so that's just not really my specialty in terms of this sort of thing. But I don't know. Maybe I got close to the mark. Maybe I didn't. This one had very abstract imagery. I wouldn't say this was very straightforward at all. It was a very abstract, very image-heavy song, which is fine, because I think some of the best songs are very abstract, and the imagery is sometimes very difficult to decipher. I talked about it in the Ne Obliviscaris one, where a lot of Zen's writing, I think, is very abstract, and intentionally. I've seen a comment from him, I think it was to a YouTube comment, about A Petrichor Weaves Black Noise, and he was saying, somebody said something about what they thought the song was about, and he was like, it's not really that, but he's like, it could be that. It's the lyrics are open to some extent of interpretation, which, if you have abstract lyrics, it sort of allows the listener the ability to read into it whatever they want. So, and I see a lot of that with, some of the other reaction channels that, do more in-depth analyzation of the lyrics. They're able to get more out of the song because they're able to interpret it the way that they want to. That's really, I think, a really smart thing to do if you're writing. And I would say that it's better, especially with certain types of material, certain types of metal. A more abstract approach is better. So this was a very interesting song. I think I would say maybe an 8.5 after looking through the lyrics. So, very good song. Yeah. But that's it for now. Um, we'll have another video later tonight for Idioglassia by Pain of Salvation. And that's going to be probably a long one and a very challenging one for me to do. And we'll get into a little bit more of why that is when we when I do the video for that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not really necessarily looking forward to doing it. It's I think it's difficult to open up about a song that is has emotional resonance for you. And it's not that there's specific things in that song. I think that the song is about specifically, and I don't relate to those specific things. But at the same time, a lot of what that song talks about in a more general sense are things that I definitely can relate to. So, yeah. But anyways, we'll be hitting that later tonight. Thanks for watching this reaction. This was once again, this was Virgin Black. Our Wings Are Burning, and I don't know what album this was off of. Oh, the album was called Elegant and Dying. So that was the album. So if you enjoyed it, check them out. Interesting and very unique goth doom metal band from Australia. Have a good one, guys. Stay metal.